But yeah, no, everyone has their thing. There's some people that love crafting and they can do it all day, and there's some people that, they love to buy it, and that's it.
Very cool. All right, at this point I'm going to invite people in the channel to go ahead and start typing in their questions. Please leave about 60 seconds in between bumping your questions, just so we can read through all the questions that come up. I wanted to ask you just a little bit, and my questions are pretty general. I'm sure these guys have some fairly in-depth questions that we may or may not be able to get answers on tonight. Just in general, maybe could you talk a little bit about melee combat, since we do have these class interviews about these pretty hefty melee style classes. Maybe if you could talk about the philosophy of combat in Ion just a little bit, and how combat in flight will just kind of changes the dynamic of the game.
Sure. Certainly the flight adds an entirely new dynamic to combat. That's so true. There are other things now that you have to think about. So, for example, every time that you're actually in air, your physical defense is decreased, so you actually are a little bit more vulnerable while you're in the air. So it's not like you can, get everybody to fly above a raid boss or an opponent and then start hammering away down at him. So there are other things you have to think about. But there's also, you've got to take in your flight time and speed into account. So there are certain items and buffs that you can apply to yourself that can increase the time that you can fly, increase the speed that you can fly. So
and there's certain stigma skills that you can add that are flight based, and therefore if you want to be a heavily flight oriented character, then you might want to add more skills. But at the same time, you might want to actually be a little bit more ground heavy.
Yeah, and one of the feature abilities of the Gladiator was, I think, being able to knock people out of the sky. So that was very cool to hear that as well. All right, let's go ahead and start asking some audience questions. Ruben, do you have our first question?
All right, let's see here. Okay, would you be able to talk a little bit about what steps you're taking, again, for anti-bot steps you might be taking, or, steps to kind of do away with, farmers and that kind of thing?
Sure. I saw that pop up like 18 times in the chat.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're always working to, help prevent bots and improve our customer experience. You can't really get into all the details of everything, just, because that's internal workings what it is. But, we're committed to making the best customer experience possible, and I think that a lot of that comes from game design that you'll actually see within the game in terms of, how we design both the economy and the leveling system, but also, there's all the back-end things and the tools and the systems and the people that work behind the scenes that we don't talk about, because if we start talking about them, people will start figuring out, and then we'll have to reconfigure. So it's one of those things. It's a back-and-forth battle, but it's something we're committed to working on.
Awesome.
Okay, great. The tester asks, as for PvP in the game, what incentives do players have to engage in PvP? And he adds that endgame content has always been a problem for him for NCSoft games that he's played. Maybe what does Ion do differently to address that?
Well, one of the really cool things about Ion is that, and I know that especially anyone who's listening to this has probably read in articles that we've really tried to marry the two of PvP and PvE, and I think it makes this especially unique. So with the PvP experience, because especially in the Abyss, you're trying to gain control of different artifacts, different fortresses, and those who do have control are, things like the best hunting grounds, the best items become available to them, and we really wanted to make that a focus for PvP. To be able to to experience that. And I guess for, I don't know if Brian wants to jump in with the, in terms of having like end-game content.
We tried to offer a little bit of everything for an Ion. We don't want to force people down this certain path in our game to where they're kind of stuck in that rut. That's kind of where the PvPvE marriage comes from. You'll be getting benefits from participating in PvE and PvP that are pretty much the same. And by doing that, we allow players to kind of transition back and forth a little bit easier. There's going to be obviously certain situations where you'll want to prepare one way versus another, but on the whole, by marrying these two together, we can actually focus a lot of our development power to pleasing both people. And Ion's a game where if you want to play it when not participate in PvP, you very well can. But at the same time, if you want to take to the battles of fields and capture fortresses and pwn some folks, then you certainly can do that as well.
And then having that PvE, our AI-controlled faction, especially in the Abyss, adds something really interesting, because you could be fighting your opposing faction, and then all of a sudden, a battleship comes and drops a whole bunch of the velour down, and you now have to make this decision whether you're going to, well, first of all, you got to figure out what their intentions are. If they're going to be fighting you, or fighting with you, or fighting everybody. And then to see that shift, where all of a sudden the Elios and the Asmodeans kind of look at each other and think, all right, you know what, like, let's put our differences aside and kick these guys' butts first, and then we'll go back to fighting. And it's without actually talking to each other. So it's actually really interesting to see socially how that happens.
Yeah, you'll see some unspoken truces, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Ruben, do you have another?
Okay, somebody's asking. Oh, okay. Go ahead.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Oh, okay. I had somebody asking actually a little bit about the lore. Somebody's asking how polymorphing and the tree spell, how those work into the lore of the game.
Well, there are quite a few quests, and actually one of the quests that we showed at GDC had the polymorph system implemented. So there are quite a few quests that you'll be able to use that particular skill, or spell, sorry, that will help you complete a particular, a certain mission without having to draw attention to yourself. And that's like the one we showed at GDC, where you were polymorphed into a parrot, so that you could sneak onto a pirate ship and go unnoticed. So in terms of the lore, is the question more about... Like
role-play abilities in terms of being able to polymorph? Is that more what you're looking for? I guess I typed the answer, so it's kind of hard to get a little bit of question banter here. That other areas of the polymorph system, it's just, it's a system that works and it's in place, and we have, rangers can change into things to move faster on the ground. You've got, later on, some of the skills you get from PvP and PvE in the Abyss will actually, pretty much polymorph you into a raid boss, which is pretty sweet. There's some really cool YouTube videos out there.
So do you mind if I just answer one of the questions that I saw pop up on the chat?
Yeah, absolutely.
So someone just asked if we have any, if there's any kind of friendly banter maybe, or a war in our office, part of the office being Asmodean or Elios, and yes, absolutely.
Lines have been drawn.
Yes, it's funny too, because I started off when we played the Friends and Family testing, thinking that I was going to I'm like, you know what, I'm going to go Elios because I am all for Asmodean. I'm going to go Asmodean at the time of launch, and the story now is so rich, and you really want to once you spend the first 10 levels learning about your character, learning about your faction's history, and then you kind of become connected to that. And now I think it would be very hard to tear me away from the Elios. I might give the Asmodeans a chance, but we definitely have in-office arguments about it all the time, especially with for me with the other community managers.
Anybody that plays Asmodean, I just say, is a little bit too angry.